we thought we would invite Alexandra Silfverstolpe, who is founder and managing director of Data Act Lab, which is new to me, so you might have to explain it a bit in your introduction. Okay. And to present a toolbox, a suggestion for how to actually monitor that SDG 2, which is ending hunger, is implemented. Because it's one thing to come to a conference and agree on the wording and say, yes, we're all going to end hunger in 2030, nice, and then everyone goes home. How do you follow up on that? How do you see how the work is going and whether or not we're even getting close to? As you're going to present this to us, I look very much forward to seeing how we're going to follow up on it.
Thank you very much. My name is Alexandra Silfverstolpe. I'm the founder of Data Act Lab. We work on data visualization and work primarily with think tanks, but also governments, and help them to make sense of complex data. So data can be used in a better way to drive better decisions. What I will talk about today is a project that is called Ending Rural Hunger. It is the first tool or global accountability framework to track one of the SDGs. So in this case, we're looking at the SDG 2 on ending hunger. It's a really exciting project, I think. We worked with the researchers at the Brookings Institution in Washington, who in turn used expertise of about 120 experts globally to set up a framework to track SDG 2 on hunger. The project is financed by Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and was launched this year at the CFS in Rome in October. So in short, what we did was that we realized that a lot of data is sitting out there in many different databases. And what we did was that we took the data from 29 sources in all and put it into one database. And the problem has been so far that a lot of different data sets are sitting in different organizations. But by pulling it together, we could start to compare the data and also clean the data, compare the data, so we could get many different dimensions when it comes to food and nutrition security. So in this framework, or this tool, we look at 106 indicators to track the SDG 2 on hunger. And many people would say, well, the global framework, the UN is discussing this global framework, how to track all the SDGs. And they're talking about selecting about 10 to 12 indicators per goal. But in this project, we realized that we need to look at a much broader set of data in order to make sense of what goes on. So we're looking at 3 different dimensions of data. We wanted to find out where the true needs are globally. We wanted to look at data on policies, which policies are conducive or not to eradicate hunger and also boost agricultural productivity. And then we wanted to look at the financial resources that are available globally to end hunger and boost agricultural productivity. So that's exciting, I think, about the framework, because we managed to get data on the 3 dimensions, and by putting them together and stack them on top of each other, we started to see interesting trends. The framework that we will have a look at in a second is universal. We look not only at developing countries, but also developed countries. The SDG framework is global. Everybody is supposed to contribute to these goals. So I thought I would just start by showing you a very short video that explains in short what the project is about, and then we will look into some of the data tools that we developed.
The Sustainable Development Goals were agreed upon by 193 countries in September 2015. Goal 2 aims to end hunger by 2030. To meet this ambitious but achievable goal, we need to bring together data on all key actors engaged in this global effort. Every actor has a role to play in identifying gaps and addressing needs over the next 15 years. The Ending Rural Hunger website is a tool to review and follow up on this goal by looking at ending hunger in rural areas. The Ending Rural Hunger framework uses 106 indicators across 145 countries. It measures the extent of needs, the strength of policies, and tracks investments for rural food and nutrition security. Using our ranking tool, you can immediately see that New Zealand and Australia do much better than their peers on both dimensions of domestic policy rankings. You can also use the bubble graphs to correlate the data. Here, for example, you can identify in which countries investments might yield greatest impact for rural food and nutrition security. Or you can view all of the Ending Rural Hunger data in the map view. Or click on a country to see a snapshot view of the country profile. The website also includes ready-made research and advocacy tools. The report presents key results using data available on this website. Or check out our country profiles to see how your country is doing in the fight to end hunger by 2030.
Okay, so with this very short introduction, I thought we would have a look at the website and some of the tools. And obviously, there's a lot of information on the website. I will share the link with you at the end of the presentation, and I really encourage all of you to look into it more in depth. And now I will only be able to give you a very quick snapshot of what kind of information you can actually assess from the project. So, as was mentioned previously, it's a global framework. We look at in all on 116 developing countries with a specific data set where we look at needs, policies, and resources available to end hunger. And then we also look at developed countries to see to what extent developed countries actually have conducive policies in place to eradicate hunger. And what we look at is the problem of producer subsidies and also trade restrictions when it comes to agricultural products. And then we looked at the quality of food and nutrition security aid. So going back to the framework to look at the developed countries, we see that when we look at needs, and I should explain the logic of this, what we did was that we put all the 116 countries on a scale from 0 to 100 to compare the countries vis-a-vis each other. So the darker the red here, the worst is the situation for each and every indicator. And what we can see here when we look at needs, we looked at access to food, malnutrition, agricultural productivity, and vulnerability. And these 4 dimensions follow the logic of the SDG 2 goal and sub-targets. And what we see is that really no matter which indicator that we choose, that most of the problems actually lie in sub-Saharan Africa. All these dark red countries here, this is where we have the greatest problems when it comes to access to food, malnutrition, agricultural productivity, etc., etc. We also wanted to try to capture vulnerability and the countries, how effective they can be by environmental shocks, production shocks, and consumption shocks. And here we see that it's a lot of countries up here in the north of Africa and the Middle East, for example, when it comes to environmental shocks that can hamper the production of agriculture production and the end of hunger. Then we also looked at the policies. What policies are in place in these countries? Are they conducive or not? And we looked at many different dimensions here. The rural investment climate, agriculture pricing and trade distortions, research skills, etc. And then the political prioritization. Do these countries actually prioritize agriculture, nutrition, etc. in their national development strategies? And in the end, we looked at the resources available. Where do we have a lot of resources available actually to fight hunger and boost agricultural productivity? And all again, we see that the resources available in these countries where we really have the greatest need is actually quite scarce. From this view, you can then click into to all the countries and get quick snapshots of what goes on within the different countries. We can see, for example, in Egypt, that they're doing quite well when it comes to the needs. The needs are lesser comparatively to other countries in Africa, whereas in Ethiopia, the situation is quite severe. The little black line here in all these small snapshots is the regional average. So what we see here is sort of Ethiopia's situation compared to the region as such. We can then also click into each country and get much more in-depth information on the same data, now brought down at the country level. So now we're looking at Ethiopia, and what you'll be able to see in all these country profiles, and there are similar for the 116 countries, is sort of a snapshot view on data. Up here, you can, for example, see the agriculture production, what kind of products are produced in each and every country. We can dig in and see where the problem lies when it comes to the needs. Is it a question of access to food or malnutrition, agricultural productivity gap, or vulnerability? And in the case of Ethiopia, we see here that they actually score dark red on most of these needs indicators. When we switch over to their agriculture policy, we see that they do somewhat okay on the rural investment climate. They get yellow, their agriculture pricing and trade distortions. But when it comes to research skills and extension, they get dark red. They have very limited resources for that. Also, when it comes to the political prioritization, they score well on some aspects. For example, their nutrition policies, but their rural social assistance policies and women's enabling environment, for example, is scoring much worse. So this is just to give you a snapshot what goes on at country level, and in order to help different international actors to sort of see where the problems lie, so you can start a dialogue on what to do, what should we focus on in this specific country. I will now switch over to the framework tracking developed countries, rich countries. As I mentioned, we wanted to look at the policies, if they are conducive or not. And what we looked at was producer subsidies. And you can actually click into each and every indicator and get the scores and the values for all of these data sets. And also the trade restrictions. And at the bottom here, we have the quality of the FNS aid policy. And what we wanted to look at was the volume of aid. Is it adequate or not for each and every country? Do the countries target their resources, the FNS aid resources effectively? And what is the quality of implementation? And the quality of implementation follows the logic of the Paris Declaration, if you're all familiar with that. So let's look at some scorecards here. We can dig into Sweden and see what we are good at and where we need to improve. So for each developed country, we have a scorecard where you can get some basic facts on what each country does. And what we see here at the top is that Sweden provides or allocates close to $4 billion per year on agriculture and biofuel subsidies, compared to $137 million on aid and food nutrition security. And I think it's quite an interesting comparison. Here we can also see the composition of the Swedish aid budget on what is it actually being spent. 30% is spent on rural development. And here, about a quarter is spent on agriculture development. And I wanted to see the research. We have here the orange is 9% is going towards agriculture research, which is not a lot, really. And we'll come back to that later. When we look at the policies, are we good or bad at directing our policies in order to promote the end of hunger and agricultural production? Well, we score quite fairly well on producer subsidies and trade restrictions. But if we go down here at the bottom and look at the quality of the Swedish FNS aid policy, we don't score very well. We do not target our efforts to countries where the needs are the greatest. We do target our efforts to countries where we have strong policies in place, but we don't target FNS aid to countries that actually do lack resources to tackle the problem by themselves. And also, when we look at the quality of implementation, we can see that there is a strong gender focus in the Swedish FNS aid policy, but the climate change focus is actually very weak. So I thought I would just share with you very quickly also the rankings tool, where I can actually go in and the same data is now resliced, so you can start to rank countries and see how they compare vis-a-vis each other. And what we look at here is which countries are best and the worst at the various dimensions. And when it comes to domestic agriculture and biofuel policy, we have New Zealand and Australia up here. They are the countries with the greatest policies in place. Sweden is down here as number 12. We are not the best, but we're not the worst either. At the bottom here we have Luxembourg, Switzerland, Japan, Korea, etc. That needs to improve their aid policies. Their domestic and agriculture biofuel policies dramatically. We can also go in and look at just the quality of the FNS aid policy. And again, we see that Sweden, where are we now? We are on number 8. But the ones that are actually topping the list with the best FNS aid policy is Luxembourg, Denmark, and Iceland. And at the bottom we have the United States, etc., Portugal, Slovenia, etc., etc. But with this tool you can really go in, and if you just want to look at one dimension, the targeting, who's targeting their aid the best, you can go in and play around with the data. And then I thought I would end with this correlations view, which I think is quite interesting. And what we can see here is all countries are now developing countries are these different bubbles. The orange bubbles are European countries. Green is Latin America. The yellow bubble is Sub-Saharan Africa. And what we see up here in this corner are countries that have strong policies. The higher up, the stronger the country's policies are. And here at the bottom, it becomes weaker. And the further we go to the right, the needs are the greater. And the size of the bubble here is the amount of resources that is actually spent and available in this country per rural capita. So it's quite interesting to see that up here in this corner, we have countries that have strong policies in place, but the needs are actually quite low comparatively. And this is also the countries with the greatest amount of resources to tackle the problem. Whereas down here, we have countries that really have great needs. Central African Republic, Chad, Eritrea, Congo, etc., Somalia. They also have very weak policies, and that could be a reason why the bubbles are so small. There are not a lot of public and private investors that want to invest resources in these countries. But what we can see is that there are also a number of countries up here that have great needs and somewhat good policies that actually receives quite limited resources. Lesotho, Benin, Namibia, Tanzania, Malawi, Mozambique, etc. And these are countries where we believe that resources could have a greater impact if it was directed there. Let's see. So what? Well, wait, it's very so what can we conclude from this? Obviously, there are a lot of conclusions, and I really encourage you to read the full report. There's a lot of really interesting information in there, but there are some things that I think is worth highlighting. And the conclusion the researchers, I should say, at the Brookings made were really that ending rural hunger is possible, but it needs action. We can't continue on doing business as usual. It won't do the trick. We won't reach any of the targets if we just continue on like we have done until now. More and better FNS aid is needed, and it needs to be targeted much more strategically. We realize that there is a lot more need for support for agricultural research. That is where we can have great impact. And currently, not enough money is invested in agricultural research comparatively to other types of programs. Subsidies, even though subsidies have been, even though they are going down, it's still a big problem. In 2013, the average amount of money for that country spent on subsidies was 35 times more than what the country spent on FNS aid. And just by shifting or reducing subsidies by 5%, we could actually double the amount of FNS aid. More investments are needed in infrastructure. I think that is something positive with the new SDG framework. Infrastructure is back on the agenda again. The need for better roads, better electricity, better water supply, etc., is needed to boost agricultural productivity. And we will need to look for new types of partnership where we can see public actors linking up with private actors for many reasons, but not the least to increase smallholder farms production and get them into global value chains. Thank you very much. This is the link to the website. It's open. All the tools are free for anyone to use. And you will also be able to see on the website, there are small sort of boxes where you can see the methodology page, where all the data is explained, how you can use it. You can also download the data sets, etc. Thank you.
Don't go yet. Very interesting presentation, but I'm sure there must be a few questions. I have one, and that is when you put up you talked about FNS aid, food and nutrition security, I suppose that means. Aid, you mean aid from Sweden to developing countries?
This is now globally. Or do you mean on the specific scorecard for Sweden?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, then I was so surprised it went so much to agriculture and things like that. I think that it would be interesting to know how much of the total aid that a country gives is food and nutrition security oriented, because in Sweden it's very small. Lots of talk about how agriculture is important and rural development and all that, but very little money going to that. And I know in the US, if you include military aid, for example, then there's absolutely nothing going to food and nutrition security. So I think it gave us the impression that, yes, it needs to give a little more in research, but it's basically on track, but it isn't basically on track. So that would be, I think, an interesting indicator to highlight somewhere. I'm not telling the Brookings Institution how to develop their research, but that when you're discussing what needs to be done in a policy situation, I think you need to look at the targeting of aid in general to different activities. So, and now I'm sure. Oh yes, okay. Here we go, Bjorn, and then. Yeah. You do. Yeah. Everyone has to use the microphone.
Yes, we are.
Yeah.
Thank you. Björn Lundgren, first of all, congratulations. That was a fantastic presentation, and there must have been an enormous amount of work going into building up this and combining data from all those databases. I have two questions. One is, in spite of the enormous work you have put in here, the real long-term value of this is, of course, that you have means to continuously or at least regularly updating it and making sure that new data comes in. And so do you have those resources, or what are the plans? The second question is, I have worked quite a lot with forestry statistics using FAO databases and so on. And one of the weaknesses there is, of course, that much of the data coming in that particular database is based on national submissions of data that is highly unreliable. So do you have means of checking reliability of some of the things you put into this database? Those are my two questions. Thank you. But congratulations, first of all. That was fantastic.
I think we're all in, but could you pass it to Katarina? Yeah. I think we'll take the second question and then let you answer and react to.
Katarina Eriksson, Tetra Laval. Thank you, Alexandra. This is really impressive. And actually, I had the same question about the updating, if this is a frozen site or if it will be continuously updated. But I could also maybe add a question or comment that is more sort of related to my company's activities. We work a lot with school feeding and discuss with governments about their ambitions when it comes to child nutrition. Maybe at some other point it would be interesting to discuss with you if you're prepared to extend the number of indicators that you have, because I think it's quite a lot of countries do work with school nutrition as a way of improving the nutritional situation in the country, and it's part of either their agriculture or their health or education policies. And there's a lot of data around this, which we are also, we have access to some of it, but we're also interested to see these data collected somewhere. So maybe that's a discussion for the future.
Okay, please.
Thank you very much. Very good that the two of you brought up the issue of updating the data. I forgot to mention that. The whole idea is that this framework will be updated as soon as new data is brought in. And this is the work that we will do now with Brookings to see how we can automatically update the data. And this is the work of my technicians, but they will build small robots going to the various different data sources, or the data sources will feed into this database, and then it pops up automatically in the framework. So that will happen. Obviously, one would need to, the whole idea is that the framework should be relevant until 2030. But obviously, there will be new data coming in, and there will be need to revise the indicators probably as we go along as well. So that will happen. Or Brookings rather, is discussing now who should own the platform. It is still hosted within Brookings, but the idea is that it should be handed over possibly to the FAO so they can have it and continue on creating debate and so on it. Either the FAO or possibly the OECD. We will have to see where it will land in the end. The quality of data, I mean, this is obviously a very tricky thing, and it was a very difficult task here as well. Happily, I wasn't involved in all of that work. It was the researchers at Brookings, but they did a tremendous job to try to look at the data sets, try to assess the quality of the data, to see, I think what they did was that they wanted to make sure that at least for the past 5 years that it was some sort of logical consistency in the data in order to include it. We also needed to select data and type of indicators where we would have some sort of broad coverage. So, yeah, my guess is this is probably as good as it can get, but more resources is definitely needed in order to improve the quality of the data. School feeding. Katarina, I think what we have here, I don't know if this is what you're looking for, but on this map you will be able to see child malnutrition across developing countries, under 5 wasting, stunting, and anemia in children. So here you can at least get an idea where the problem is the greatest when it comes to child malnutrition. Yeah, I think I answered all of the questions.
Yeah, I think you did a fairly good job too. Other questions from the floor? Yeah, Marilyn?
Thank you. My name is Marilyn. I work in an NGO. And I understand the reason for focusing on rural questions, because obviously that's where the huge problems are. On the other hand, we are seeing a big increase, not so much in hunger, but in malnutrition in urban areas, and not least in rich countries. The children are certainly not hungry, but so to that list I would add obesity or child obesity. Is that something you've considered, or is it too marginal at this point to be of interest?
Very good point as well. This is an issue that was discussed throughout the project as well. And the researchers at Brookings found or made the decision to focus on rural hunger in this point in time, because that is where the greatest problem is right now. But as you say, you're absolutely right. We will have a lot of problems when it comes to urban malnutrition, etc. And I hope that the framework will look into new trends and so on, and that can be included at later stages as well in the framework.
Well, thank you very much. Excellent presentation, very interesting and useful tool. We like to be useful for our members. Thank you.